Almost a year into its war on Gaza, Israel is fighting on multiple fronts. So far, it doesn't seem to have achieved any of its stated war goals. Does the military have a clear plan, or is it solely intent on degrading its enemy's capabilities? This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm James Bays. Israel targets the Jazeera Media Network yet again, this time in the occupied West Bank. During a pre-dawn raid on Sunday, the military issued an order to close the channel's bureau in Ramallah for 45 days. The Israeli government has already banned Al Jazeera from reporting within Israel. And with no let-up in its bombardment of Gaza, the military is also expanding operations in the occupied West Bank and across the border into Lebanon. There are also reports Israel is planning to issue mass evacuation orders in northern Gaza, similar to what it did in the first week of the war back in October. What's the real objective behind this plan? Does Israel intend to reoccupy Gaza permanently? We'll go to our guests in a moment, but first this report from Ferdy Akar.
Heavily armed Israeli soldiers faced resistance from only cameras and microphones when they tried to silence Al Jazeera's reporting in the occupied West Bank.
This is a decision that was made by one of the Israeli generals. He is ordering us to immediately leave the office and take our personal belongings and cameras. The army says we have only 10 minutes to take our belongings and leave the office so they can shut it down.
The office will be closed for 45 days.
The closure of Al Jazeera's bureau in Ramallah follows the ban imposed on the network's operations within Israel back in May. It's the latest crackdown on foreign media and comes as the Israeli government is facing growing criticism.
Israel has no right, legally speaking, to close any office in any place in Area A or B. Yet they did it. And that means that Israel has practically eliminated any role or any authority of the Palestinian Authority. And we are back to the situation of full occupation.
Every week, hundreds of thousands of Israelis have protested in major cities, demanding Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu agree on a Gaza ceasefire deal and bring home the roughly 100 captives still held in the Strip. But the Prime Minister has rebuffed pressure at home and abroad, instead insisting on Israeli control over all of Gaza's borders. Now he faces pressure from within his coalition to carry out what could amount to ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. The so-called General's Plan, proposed by senior military officers, would see the Israeli army besiege northern Gaza from the Netzarim corridor upwards. About 300,000 Palestinians are clinging on to what remains of the area. Those who don't comply with the forced evacuation orders will be given the choice to surrender or die. Last month, Netanyahu ordered the military to prepare to take control of aid distribution in the north of the Strip, fueling fears that Israel is planning a long-term occupation, which would possibly include the construction of illegal settlements. Israeli forces are battling Hamas in sites across Gaza, exchanging fire with Hezbollah and Lebanon, and carrying out major raids in the occupied West Bank. And the government, under Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, does not appear willing or able to de-escalate during one of the biggest crises in Israeli history. Ferdy Akar, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
Well, let's discuss all of this further with our panelists today who are joining us. From Doha, we have Daniel Levy, who's the president of the US Middle East Project and a former Israeli negotiator. In Modena, Italy, is Meron Rapoport, an award-winning Israeli investigative journalist. He recently reported on those indications that Israel may be planning to close off northern Gaza. And also here in Doha is Ilan Pappe, an Israeli historian and author of The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. Thank you, all three of you, for joining us. I want to try and, in this programme, to get at what is the real plan of Netanyahu? What is Israel's aim now, almost a year into this war? But first, I must start a little bit close to home. Al Jazeera's office in Ramallah has now been closed, and I'd like your reaction to that. Daniel, why do you think they've taken this step now?
Because they can. Unfortunately, this pulls together three strands that we have seen, not just throughout the last year, but for an awfully long time, which is criminality met only by impunity, firstly. Secondly, the media, and this is more of a phenomenon of the recent period, how much Israel has targeted the media. It doesn't want the story to get out. The story gets out anyway. Whether or not that's linked to a more destructive campaign in the West Bank, we shall see. They have announced that there's a rolling campaign of destruction that's going to go on. Those are my ways of describing it, not theirs. And thirdly, that it's all Israel, right? So when they pass legislation that bans Al Jazeera in Israel, as far as they're concerned, Ramallah, the West Bank, the entire Palestinian expanse is the one state reality of Greater Israel, which they have created.
So, Ilan, let's follow up on that, because under the Oslo Accords, the Palestinians didn't get a state, but they got control of certain areas. Ramallah, where the Al Jazeera bureau is, right bang in the centre of Ramallah, is Area A. It's supposed to be under full Palestinian control. The licence for Al Jazeera's office was issued by the Palestinian Authority. Has Israel any legal right to close the Al Jazeera office? And if not, does it prove that there is total occupation now and apartheid in the West Bank?
Well, I think the Oslo Accord should not be regarded as a binding document. The Oslo Accord is a statement of what Israel can and cannot do. And as Daniel commented, there's very little it cannot do. It is not the first time that Israel operates in Ramallah as if it is the occupying power in Ramallah. And therefore, of course, it's a sham to say that there is an independent Palestinian authority there that controls every aspect of life. As far as the Israeli security forces and the army is concerned, they can go in and out whenever they want and do whatever they want. So I think it's less about violating the Oslo Accord and much more about the second thing that you said that already was now just stated by the International Court of Justice, that we are not just talking about occupation. We are long beyond occupation. This is now an area annexed to Israel, integrated into Israel, ruled through various means of control, but it is totally at the mercy and under the mercy of Israel and under its control.
Meron, you are the journalist on the panel, so I'd like your reaction. Of course, Israel always claims it's a democracy, it has freedom of speech, freedom of the press. Really?
Of course not, as regard the Palestinian, and I join what Ilan and Daniel said about the non-existent Oslo Agreement and its implication. Israel is acting in the West Bank freely. But I think what has to be mentioned here is that Israel is really, from the beginning of the war in Gaza, is leading a campaign against media. Not only more than 100 Palestinian journalists were killed in Gaza, but Israel prevents international journalists from coming into Gaza. And this is on purpose. They don't want the world to see. And if that means shutting down the Al Jazeera offices in Ramallah, so be it.
OK, well, if they don't want people to see things in Gaza, is that also, Daniel, the case in the West Bank? We've seen the biggest operation by Israel since 2002 this month in the West Bank. Both you and Ilan are at a conference organised by Georgetown University here in Doha. I was there earlier on speaking to some people, and there were worries among people I spoke to about what Israel has planned next for the West Bank. Do you have fears too?
Yes, and we're already in the throes of that. We've already seen not significant operations from a security perspective so much as significant operations in terms of the level of destruction and scorched earth, including of vital infrastructure that have been conducted in parts of the northern West Bank, in Tulkarm, Jenin and elsewhere. And the declaration, they're not hiding this, is that this will spread to other parts of the West Bank. What we have here, I think, is an intention for this to be an ongoing open war in Gaza, very likely in the north, which we may discuss, in the West Bank, and whether it's displacement of Palestinians from Gaza or Palestinians in the West Bank, whether it's making the conditions unlivable for Palestinians. This is all part of the plan, and I think closing down of the Al Jazeera offices aligns very neatly with that. And it is also a message to the world, where there was an overwhelming majority at the United Nations General Assembly, of course not including the US, one of the few states to vote against, adopting the measures called for and the articulation of the International Court of Justice regarding the illegality of the occupation, regarding third-party responsibilities. And Israel, I think, is saying, as ever, and snubbing its nose to international law.
Ilan, I mean, we know life is already incredibly hard for Palestinians who are living in the West Bank. Do you fear that Israel may be trying to bring some of the Gaza conditions to the West Bank?
Yes, I do fear that. I think we have here, first of all, an important political force within the Israeli government of neo-Zionist, messianic politicians who hold important positions in the government, who regard the current situation as a window of opportunities to implement their messianic and fanatic ideas of having a greater Israel from the river to the sea with as few Palestinians as possible. So I think a part of what we're seeing, even if it sounds incremental and yet not totally drastic, has people with a vision behind it, where the West Bank is the next station after Gaza for implementing these kinds of messianic ideas. Alongside them, you have the policymakers in the army, in the security service that already in the past did not offer anything else but, when force is not working, to use more force. And the dehumanization of the Palestinians in the West Bank is not different from the dehumanization of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And there will be no moral inhibition in the way that they will try to crash any resistance that they will encounter, whether in the refugee camps or in the cities themselves. So I'm afraid that the more than 700 Palestinians who died already since the 7th of October is not the final number, and the destruction we've already seen is not the final picture of what Israel can and intend to do also in the West Bank. And we have to remind, and I'm sure your viewers are, because they're watching Al Jazeera, they know that Israel, the settlers and the army are already perpetrating ethnic cleansing operations in the south of Mount Hebron and in other parts, and few thousand Palestinians have already lost their homes. And this is all done in this kind of gradual, a more partial kind of operation compared to Gaza. But I think the purpose, the intention, and the ideology behind it are the same.
So, Daniel, do you think there is a possibility with this current Israeli hardline government that they might actually try and push Palestinians out of the West Bank and out of East Jerusalem, possibly push them into Jordan? I mean, that seems a very far-fetched idea, or would have done a year ago, but is it now a possibility?
It is a declared intention on the part of the government that Palestinians should have a choice, either get on board with being second-class citizens, non-citizens in an apartheid reality, or find your home elsewhere. I don't think at this stage that we should look at that as a far-fetched scenario. It doesn't mean that loading people on trucks tomorrow, although that's a terrifying prospect which we should also not make light of. I think at the moment it's about degrading conditions, making things as hard as possible for Palestinians. That is the direction of travel, whether it gets more dramatic. We've seen that effort in Gaza. But what we also see alongside that even though Israel has the international backing, even though this is not just Israel's war, but America's war, we also see the resilience of the Palestinian people, and one shouldn't make light of that either. Even if you have a PA leadership, which has long preemptively given up on Palestinian rights, you have a very resilient Palestinian society that resists and that holds its ground and that shows steadfastness. So it's not going to be easy.
OK, well, turning to you, Meron, because you've done some interesting reporting and presented a scenario with regard to Gaza. Now, we heard Ilan talk about the messianic ideas of some in the current Israeli government. Tell us some of the proposals, not by government members, but some of the proposals that are being floated by prominent figures in Israel about what to do in Gaza, and your view on a possible scenario.
There's one major plan that was presented by ex-General Gil Island, who was the head of the National Security Council previously. And he suggested that Israel will declare Northern Gaza a closed military area, tell the 300,000 at least, maybe more, Palestinians that are still there to leave within a week. And afterwards, those who will remain there will be a blockade, a total blockade, even to make them die of hunger. Now, he is saying that this goes according to international law because it gives the civilians time to leave Gaza. He doesn't mention if they can return. And this plan was adopted by many ex-generals. And today we even heard that even Netanyahu said in a closed meeting that he is considering this plan. Now, what I asked, and I didn't get an answer, but it's a not so hypothetical question. What will happen if some or more or most of the 300,000 Palestinians will refuse to leave, will stay? Will they be starved to death? Will they be decimated, as one of a professor who supported the plan suggested? This is a question that I think Israel does not have an answer, and I'm afraid this is a scenario that quite easily may happen.
Daniel, how would that sort of scenario, cutting up Gaza, sealing off Northern Gaza, making people leave Northern Gaza, even starve or surrender policies, remember that was what the West was so critical of Assad in Syria and of the Russians in places like Mariupol. How will this be seen if Israel proceeds with these sort of policies by Western governments and the US?
First, James, let's just acknowledge that the deeply racist colonial mindset underpinning this kind of thinking, which Meron has explained to us. Some academics have written papers on this. You've got the former head of the National Security Council, who Meron quoted, and he goes into greater depth in his article. But what we see here, this whole language that we've seen throughout of claiming Israel is a civilization against the brutes. This is the language of 19th century racist settler colonialism propagated with 21st century technology. I'm not saying Israel's the only racist state, but most countries, when they're saying that stuff, don't do it transparently. They code it. Israel apparently doesn't feel a need to do so, which hints at the answer to your question, James, which is we're now almost a year and after the criminal acts conducted against Israeli civilians on October 7th, after those acts, Israel immediately didn't wait a day even to stated its intention to violate international law, to withhold food, fuel, water, electricity from the Palestinian civilian population. It made clear that it would make no distinction with that civilian population, and it's gotten away with it. I think we would be naive if we would expect that the American-led reaction, and America runs a heck of a lot of diplomatic, political, military, and economic cover for Israel. We would be naive if we were to expect that reaction to be differently. So are we going to see not only the mobilization we've seen thus far, but are we going to see others mobilizing to prevent it? But again, I would say Israel has not won in Gaza. This will not be easy to implement. In fact, Israel is stuck in a operation that is a war now of attrition, which does not bode well for it. It struggles now with reservists showing up when they are called up. Hamas has not been penetrated and infiltrated as Hezbollah has, as we've just seen. Israel has not succeeded in delinking a northern front from a Gaza front. So these schemes may exist, and horrors will continue to be visited upon Palestinians in Gaza. But Israel's ability to win this, the idea that this strategically will serve Israel in the long term, the idea that it can get away with it versus the Palestinians, I think those things should be questioned. And I think the answer to that question will not work in favor of Israel. It's not thus far restored its deterrence in Gaza. I don't think it will. And that might be part of the reason we're seeing some of the actions in Lebanon.
Well, talking about Lebanon, Ilan, because we've talked about the West Bank and Gaza already, as an eminent historian of Israel, I think you'd probably agree, Israel traditionally was very wary of a multi-front war. But does the current leadership of Israel actually want that prospect?
Well, the current government of Israel, first of all, has a prime minister who wants a war. He needs a war. And he believes that without a war, his own political career is in tatters. So definitely the main policy maker of Israel wants a war. It doesn't even is afraid of an escalating war that might be a regional war. Secondly, I already mentioned his neo-Zionist messianic allies also want a war. The military probably wants to have a more controlled situation. As Daniel mentioned, they think totally unrealistically that they can win in one front and the other front will wait for them. It's already been proven a total failure. So yes, you have here a political and military leadership that wants a war, but wants it to be very much on the terms that Israel is used in the past for winning wars. And this is where Israel is going to fail, and is going to fail dismally. In the past, there were three conditions that that the Israeli military commanders and leaders believed in. The first principle was that you have to take the initiative. That's already lost. The second principle is that the war has to be fought in the enemy's territory. That is not happening. And thirdly, that you cannot survive a long war. And that's a very long war. So,
okay.
In fact,
can I bring in Daniel at the end of the conversation now, Daniel? And I'm leaving it as a footnote, but it seems it is a footnote, which is diplomacy. We're talking about all of these military options. Diplomacy, Prime Minister Netanyahu goes to the UN in the coming days. Other world leaders will be there. The UN is pushing for restraint in diplomacy. Briefly, do you see any chance of a diplomatic opening at this time, given everything that we've discussed?
Netanyahu does not have an outcome that is not militarily driven, nor zero-sum, and therefore that leaves no space for diplomacy on Israel's part. Unfortunately, the US has closed off avenues of diplomacy on their part by mirroring, shadowing every Israeli move by moving its own battleships so that it puts itself deep in moral hazard, that it could get pulled into this war just when it is October, last month before a US election. I'm not saying that's what's driving Israel's intentionalities here. Look, I want to make one point on this. Israel has clearly degraded the Hezbollah capacity in some ways. It may feel that it can now move forward with that. But the question is, how much of a hit will the Israeli home front take in response? Because the idea that the axis of resistance is on its last legs and is almost defeated, I think is for the birds. I think we've seen that already. And there is a strategic patience on that side. Yes, they've taken a hit, but there's a strategic patience on that side. And Israel is not going to win in this way. And eventually, sadly, it seems they will learn the hard way.
So, Meron, how dangerous do you see this moment, not just for Israel and the Palestinians, but for the region?
It's a very dangerous moment. There's no doubt. I think it's not clear still if Israel really wants a full-blown war with Hezbollah, with Lebanon. It's not clear. There are contradicting signs here, but it's quite possible that this is Israel's intention, and therefore we are on the verge of a very, very serious development that may endanger the whole Middle East, not only Palestinians, Israelis, also Lebanese, and maybe far beyond that. This is a very critical moment. The Americans have just moved away, are looking to the other side, and we are basically, talking the people of the region, are left alone. And this is not a good sign and a good moment.
Well, thank you very much, the three of you, for joining us on this rather depressing conversation today on Inside Story. Daniel Levy, Meron Rapoport and Ilan Pappe. Comprehensive coverage from across the region continues around the clock on Al Jazeera, with detailed analysis too on our phone app or at aljazeera.com. What did you make of today's discussion? What should we focus on next time? Let us know on Facebook at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or tweet at us on X, where you'll find us at AJ Inside Story. Until next time, from me, James Bays, and the team here, please stay safe and well. Bye-bye for now.